Their friendship soon blossoms into true love, but family pressure and social differences stand in their way. Will their love survive? Let's find out.
Ethan stood alone in the center of the vast marble ballroom, his footsteps echoing like ghosts. Outside, a line of silent luxury cars sat idle in the driveway, their polished paint reflecting the dying evening light. His parents were in Zurich again, leaving behind nothing but cold credit cards. He walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the distant city lights. As he touched the freezing glass, his own faint reflection seemed like a stranger. In this massive house of stone and glass, the silence was a heavy weight, pressing against his chest.
Suddenly, a sharp metallic crash erupted from the garden. Ethan grabbed a heavy iron poker and sprinted toward the French doors.
He burst into the night, his expensive shoes sinking into the wet grass. There stood a stranger in a torn hoodie,
clutching stolen silver. The man shivered, eyes wide with terror as he raised his trembling hands. Ethan looked at the thief,
then at his own weapon. He didn't yell. Instead, he dropped the iron and offered a warm coat. "You look cold," he whispered.
The stranger looked at the coat, then into Ethan's empty eyes. That night, the oppressive silence of the mansion finally broke.
There was no judgment, only the sound of two lonely souls sharing a simple meal on the kitchen floor, finally finding warmth in the dark.
Emma gripped the worn handle of the cafe door, her apron stained with coffee grounds. It was 9 p.m. Streetlights flickered against the cold, wet pavement as she walked toward the only home she knew. Inside the cramped rental house, her mother sat by a dim lamp, counting crumpled bills. Emma placed her own earnings on the table, her hands trembling from a 10-hour shift. Every cent was a drop of sweat, a silent promise for a future beyond these walls. She pointed to her textbooks. Her mother looked up with tired eyes, shaking her head in doubt. Emma knelt, opened a book, and wrote the word teacher in bold letters. She pinned it to her chest and faced the mirror. Her mother reached out, touched the paper, and finally let the tears fall.
At the bus stop, she helped a crying boy solve his math homework.
As he smiled, Emma knew her path was clear. She boarded the bus, clutching her books, watching the city lights blur into a bright, golden road ahead.
Rain slammed against the pavement as steam hissed from Ethan's sedan. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with frustration.
Before slamming the door shut, shivering, he retreated to a rusted bus stop bench, feeling the weight of the cold world around him. A girl stood at the far edge, holding a bright yellow umbrella. Without a word, she stepped forward, tilting the canopy over his shoulder. Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting hers. She did not recognize the billionaire heir. She simply handed him a warm thermos of coffee. They spent an hour watching the wipers of passing cars.
She spoke of her job at the local library, complaining about the leaky ceiling and the smell of damp books.
Ethan laughed, a genuine, resonant sound he had not made in years.
For a moment, his wealth and titles meant nothing. When the tow truck arrived, the driver tipped his cap to Mr. Sterling. Ethan climbed in, looking back as she disappeared into the gray curtain of rain. For 3 days,
he sat in his penthouse, staring at the empty coffee cup, haunted by a girl who never knew his name.
Ethan checked his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, the seconds ticking by like lead. He paced the corner of Oak Street, a stranger in this neighborhood, drawn back every afternoon by a magnetic pull he couldn't quite explain. Finally, the school bell rang, shattering the silence.
Emma stepped out, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto his with a familiar spark.
They walked in comfortable silence toward the park, eventually settling onto the same weathered wooden bench that had become their sanctuary. The world around them seemed to fade away.
Ethan pulled a crumpled comic book from his jacket, reading a passage that made Emma tilt her head back, laughing until her eyes crinkled.
Then, the mood shifted. She revealed a notebook, pointing to a bridge she hoped to design with steady,
determined hands. Ethan watched her, turning a small stone in his pocket as he spoke of the rescue squad. "I want to be there when people need help,"
he whispered. They sat as the sun dipped behind the library, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. Emma stood up, brushing dirt from her jeans before offering Ethan a hand. He held her grip for a second longer than necessary.
A silent promise hanging in the air. They turned toward their separate paths, knowing they would meet again on this same bench at 4 o'clock.
Ethan stared at the platinum card resting on the table, its cold surface reflecting the restaurant lights. Across from him, Emma was carefully counting her modest cash, piece by piece, to cover her share of the bill. He lived in a penthouse of imported art. She worked double shifts just to pay rent. Ethan gripped his glass, the cold condensation stinging his palm, as the silence between them thickened like a physical wall. He reached out to slide his card toward the waiter, desperate to bridge the gap. But Emma placed her hand firmly over his wrist. Her gaze was steady, her resolve unbreakable. She shook her head, pushed her crumpled bills forward, and stood up to leave without a word. Ethan watched her walk toward the bus stop, her coat looking far too thin against the biting winter wind. He reached into his pocket for his car keys, ready to offer a ride, but stopped. Under the flickering street lamp, he saw her pull out a notebook, scribbling down ideas for her own startup with a focused intensity that ignored the cold. She wasn't a victim of her circumstances. She was the architect of her future. He retreated, leaving his luxury car in the shadows. He didn't offer money. Realizing she didn't need charity, Ethan closed his hand into a fist, finally understanding that his respect was her only true value.